Hi, everyone, and welcome to The Capture Life. And in this episode, we're going to be reviewing DC Comics' Batman Superman World's Finest by Mark Waid and Dan Mora. We talk about how Batman and Superman is a little bit different in this story than how we usually read them in DC Comics story, and I give everybody an update about my progress in X-Men Red, or the lack thereof. Hi, and welcome to The Capture Life, a show for the most casual and dedicated fans of comics and a member of the Comic Watch family. I'm your host, Sean. Join me and discover what the world of comics and graphic novels have to offer. From one-on-one interviews with industry professionals, roundtable discussions with passionate fans, and reviews on the latest comics, TV shows, and movies. Now let's dive right on in. Hi, everyone, and thank you for tuning into the show. Today, we're going to review DC Comics' Batman Superman World's Finest Volume 1, which consists of issues 1 through 5, by author Mark Waid, artist Dan Mora, colorist Tamra Bonvillain, and letterer Aditya Bidikar, which I hope I pronounced that correctly. I apologize if I didn't. If you're not familiar with this series, here's the official synopsis from DC Comics. The Dark Knight, the Man of Steel, they are the two finest superheroes that the world has ever known, and they're together again in an epic new series from the legendary talents of Mark Waid and Dan Mora. In the not-too-distant past, Superman's powers are supercharged from a devastating chemical attack by the villain Metallo, and the only ally that the ultra-powerful Man of Tomorrow can turn to in his turbulent hour is Gotham's own dark vengeance, the Batman. A nearly fatal burst of power drives Bruce Wayne to his own extreme measures to help his friend, enlisting none other than the Doom Patrol for his aid. It's the world's greatest superheroes from the world's greatest talent in an epic collection experience that kicks off the next big events in the DCU. Get ready, it's time to soar. So that is the official synopsis, and as you may know, I select the comics we're about to review by taking the recommendation from our guest host today. So please welcome to the show fellow comic watcher Kevin Rossi. Kevin is a Rhode Island native with a deep appreciation of language, writing, and design. As an English professor, he incorporated his love of pop culture and comic books as much as possible into his lectures and class discussions. He has been lucky enough to be part of Comic Watch since 2019 and recently went back to school to study graphic design. He currently lives in Providence, Rhode Island with his spouse and their two cats. You can find him on social media at Bronco Nova on Twitter and at Kevin Rossi on Instagram. Kevin, welcome to the show. How you doing tonight?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Man, this
Really
is
excited.
yeah, same here. And I remember when I started doing this, you were one of the first people I thought about having on the show because I know you and I started at Comic Watch around the same time. And I know you've been like a great supporter of the show ever since we started. And I just remember thinking that I need to have him on the show because one, you've been a great supporter, but two, I always love your takes on comics and you just have some like great stuff that you create as well too. So like, for example, when we did the episode about, I think it was like we did an episode about Batman and Kevin at the time was, the co-host on the show. He did a Mad Libs and we did something to where the story ends up unfolding where like the villains of Gotham that Batman was fighting was like a oversized or overgrown Kevin McAllister.
Yeah.
And they all dress up like him. And then you actually created art that made it look like these Batman villains, but dressed up in Kevin McAllister's clothes, like the green army pants and the red sweater. And I absolutely loved that and thought that was like so great. It's like our first fan art it made me feel like I made it at that point, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Because I remember it had something to do with the Condiment Man. Just like
Yes.
pick that was really um that was fun to make too. Like I'd
Yeah.
never think to make even McAllister Batman goons.
Yeah. And it was really good. Like it was funny and it looked really good. And it was really cool. And last year I meant to try to create like Christmas ornaments for gifts to send out to people. And I remember asking about if I could do that. Unfortunately, it just didn't happen because for whatever reason, when I was trying to print them, it was like really weird in terms of it wouldn't let me do like a back end, or when I try to upload the image, it didn't really fit. So I'm hoping that
Oh,
this
okay.
year I can like find a program that allow me to print it and make it look good and be able to send that out because that's something I definitely want to do at some point. So yeah. Well,
Cool.
thanks for coming on the show. One of the things I've been asking people is that our guest host is. We talk about comics, and we know that you're on the show because you love comics. But outside of comics, let's talk about like who you are as a person, and you, as you said in your bio, you're a you were an English professor. Are you still teaching English at a college?
No, no,
No.
I'm still working in that setting.
Right, right. You were
Yeah.
like, I know you were an academic advisor for a while.
Yeah, a version of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember because we had this discussion because I was academic advisor for a long time as well too. So you and I
Yeah,
talk
yeah.
about that in length and all that. But like outside of comics, you went back and started doing graphic design. Which, by the way, I gotta say this: I love the takes that you've been doing with Rob Liefeld. I know you haven't done it in a while, but you would take
I
like
was
some of
thinking about yesterday doing one.
the you need to like so for those who don't know, Kevin has taken some of photos that Rob Liefeld are out there on like Twitter that people have taken with like cosplays of like Deadpool or like create characters that he's created, right? But if you know Rob Liefeld, he's known for drawing like really, really tiny feet on characters. And so what Kevin has done is take those photos and, and like Photoshop the feet of those cosplayers and Rob to make it look really small like his characters. And then you tweeted it out and even tagged Rob Liefeld in it. And Rob has actually
Yeah.
liked to retweeted those, like not realizing what you've done to them, right?
Yeah, he did it twice, and then the third one, they made the feet super small, but he didn't retweet it. So I flew too close to the sun. But yeah, it was like back to back, he'd retweet them. It
Yeah.
was great. Yeah.
Yeah, he must have picked up on the third time. He's like, wait a second.
Yeah.
So you're going back to do graphic design right now. What are you hoping to do with graphic design? Like, what made you decide to leave what you were doing as an English professor and going back into school to study graphic design?
Yeah, I mean, I've always liked design and art. Like,
Mm-hmm.
when I was a kid, I wanted to be a comic book artist, probably most kids do. Um, realized, like, I don't have the dedication, I guess, to become, like, an artist, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then design is kind of being an artist, and
Right.
looking at the trade dress of books, the lettering is graphic design, logos, that kind of made me connect to comic books. Not that I wanna do that, but
Mm-hmm.
knowing I'm in a profession that I could do that.
Right.
Um, so right now I'm really interested in school and class package design, like tea boxes or just anything,
Mm-hmm.
and learning all about I guess, the production side of it rather than just the design side.
Right.
Yeah, and
Right.
so that's super into that right now.
So when you're talking about production design, it's explain this to me, like what production design is, because when I hear that, I'm thinking of it's not necessarily just graphic design, but like how you would actually design, like maybe a cardboard box to be delivered or something like that. Correct?
Yeah, yeah, and so with that, if you take apart like I don't know, any product, uh, maybe not a cardboard box, but like, a box of tea
Mm-hmm.
or a box that something came in,
Right.
it's kinda wonky looking, it's not just a rectangle.
Right.
There's usually like the flaps. And so realizing you have to design those, make sure everything fits perfectly, because
Mm-hmm.
you're designing in 2D and then it's gonna be this 4D really.
Right.
Um, but then you have to think about where you're printing it on what colors are you gonna be printing with.
Mm-hmm.
Um, then there's a whole 'cause do you use Adobe Suite?
Yeah. Yeah. I
If you
use
ever
it for everything basically. Yeah.
Yeah, so, like, with, Pantone colors, like, with
Mm-hmm.
Photoshop and stuff,
Yeah.
that's a whole 'nother ballgame. It's, like, the stuff you really don't think about when you look at the box of cereal. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure. No kidding. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. Let's kind of go into, what got you into comics. Usually what I've been doing on the show is I ask people like what their comic book origin story, but as I've been listening to more podcasts about comic books, like I realize that's not a very original question because everybody asks that. Because it's like, oh, origin story, that's in comic books. So yeah, let's like make it a thing. But since you picked Batman, Superman, World's Finest, I want to ask you, what's your origin story with either the World's Finest series or maybe Batman or Superman, if you enjoy one of them or the other, or if you have like a really, you know, interesting story you want to share about your origin story with one of those characters. Do you have one of
Yeah.
those that you like to share?
Yeah, well, for World's Finest, I have my dad had a bunch of old ones from the 60s.
Okay.
So I would always see those as a kid. But for I guess for Superman, um, my origin for that is the Christopher Reeve
Mm-hmm.
movie or movies. Um, and I think maybe because that was it. There was just the one
Right.
actor versus Batman. By the time I was a little kid, um, it was all the way up to George Clooney.
Mm-hmm.
So Batman on screen wasn't as iconic, I
Mm-hmm.
guess. So it was cool to have like this one Superman. Um, and then of course I was alive at the perfect time where Batman animated series was wrapping up.
Yes.
Um, X-Men animated series was wrapping up. All the Justice League shows, they were out long enough that I wouldn't have to wait for new episodes, I
Mm-hmm.
guess.
Right.
Um, so being exposed to those cartoons are also a big part of why I'm into comic books and Batman and Superman.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of my same origin story as well, too, is that when I was a kid, the Christopher Reeve Superman movies were out. And so I remember I would watch those. And then, you know, I was that kid that would get a towel and get a safety pin and put it around my neck and then actually, you know, be running around the lawn. And then I remember I first got my first Superman suit. You thought as a kid that with having that suit, that would actually enable you to fly. So I would go out to the front yard jumping and waiting for it to like actually take me off and have me flying around. So I was really disappointed that it never worked for me. But that was my introduction as well too, is those Superman movies that I must have watched on VHS at home or something like that. Because by the time he got to the fourth one, I think I was still a pretty young kid. But all the other ones I think were on VHS tapes. And then, you know, Michael Keaton and Adam West were my first two Batman uh, actors, basically, because I would watch the 1966 show on Saturday morning, and then Michael Keaton as Batman came out in '89, and now as a kid. So those were same thing with me. Those were my first introduction to those characters, and then I don't think I
Yeah.
really read a Batman comic when I was a kid, but I read The Death of Superman when I was a kid. And I remember that having like a really profound impact because I think I was 12 when it came out, 10 or 12. And I
Okay.
remember thinking like, you know, that you remember Superman being invincible and the fact that he died in this issue was just something that was mind blowing in terms of, wow,
Yeah.
it's a really powerful story and just kind of turn it everything you knew about him on its head and all that. So, but yeah, it sounds like a lot of people around our age, their first introduction to either of those characters were, you know, from the movies or TV show.
Yeah.
So, well,
Yeah.
diving into Batman, Superman's World Finest, I wanted to ask you before we start talking about the book, what made you decide to suggest this book for today's episode?
For this one, I think it's the one since 2022 I've consistently read.
Mm-hmm.
Like I read a lot, like to review. This is one that if I wasn't reviewing, I'd absolutely be following it.
Yeah.
Um, I think at the time too, in 2022, and then to now, there was like Dark Crisis going on. Um, until recently, it was just DC was still kind of a mess.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but to have this very safe, almost like a Saturday morning cartoon of a series, was really nice to just sit down and read once a month.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we'll get into it. But it's a really interesting aspect of storytelling for DC for a number of reasons. You know, one, this is a series that there's not a the world's finest series seems like it hasn't had a whole lot of issues in terms of this kind of story. I think there's only been like World's Finest for Batman and Superman has only been written like maybe a handful of times. So this is probably like the third or fourth run of World's Finest. But as we get into the series to talk about, we also find out that this is not a present day story. They just said like in the not too distant past. So not in the future,
Yeah,
but in the
yeah,
past. So this is something that's like already happened. So it's really interesting to see them write a story that has already happened and taken place. Which we find out again as we're going through it that it's really interesting to see because then I wonder if that helps you avoid continuity issues because you already know like what's happened and someone can actually check those things instead of like having all these stories happening all at once and hoping that none of them can contradict each other or anything like that. So it's a really interesting
yeah.
aspect because I don't think I've seen that happen too often where they write a story that's already has happened or taken place in continuity, but it's a new story that's being written as well too. So yeah, so let's go ahead and dive into the story. And for anyone that's listening, if you have not read Batman Superman's World Finest yet, this is your spoiler warning now to let you know that we're going to be talking about what happens. And this is just issues 1 through 5. They're currently on issue number 14, I think, of the series, but this volume that we're reading is volume 1 that consists issues 1 through 5 that came out last year in 2022. But if you haven't read it yet and you don't want it to be spoiled, this is your warning now to go ahead and pause this and not go further until you've read it. So with that being said, let's go ahead and kind of do a synopsis of what the story is about with Kevin and I. So Kevin, in issue 1, what we find out is again, this happens in a not too far off past, but it opens up with, of all people, Poison Ivy in Metropolis, right? And Poison Ivy is having all of these like plants and veins, coming up and through the ground. Metropolis seems like it's under attack. And then she's expecting Superman to show up and she hears someone, address her. But when she turns around, she seems surprised because she finds that it's Batman and Robin behind her, right? So they stop Poison Ivy. Superman shows up after, saving everybody from the Daily Planet, from the buildings falling down and things like that. And he comes back up. And then Metallo shows up. Is that how you pronounce the name? Do you know? Is it Metallo or is it
I
Metallo?
think so. I say Metallo,
Yeah,
but I've read it that way since I was a kid.
yeah.
So who knows?
So you know who Metallo is then?
Yeah, kind of a classic Superman villain. Yeah.
Okay. I think this is the first time I've ever heard of or seen Metallo. So this was like brand new to me.
Yeah.
And
He's more
it's
of a Silver Age like villain, which that's what Waid is kind of playing around with that age.
yeah,
Because it's kind of a silly concept.
right. Well, because it at first when I was looking at this, it looked like almost the cyborg Superman that we had after the Death of Superman events. Because it's kind of like a half machine, half person. But then we find out that he has kryptonite in him as well too. Because when he shows up, like that's the first thing Superman said is kryptonite.
Yeah.
So yeah, so Metallo shows up and he takes this vial of or a syringe of red kryptonite cocktail, basically. So I guess red kryptonite, for people who don't know, has an effect on Superman where if it gets ejected, apparently he goes through like transmutations or transformations or something like that.
Yeah. Red Kryptonite is random. Like,
Yeah,
you don't know what the effect is. So
right.
that's kind of a Silver Age silly thing, too. It's not so silly here, but
Right. Yeah.
that's kind of a thing that Waid probably wanted to play around with.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting is just like you said, it's random, but Metallo specifically said that it's not just one red kryptonite, but I guess it's like a cocktail of 12. So he takes that and injects it into Superman. And then we see him start going through some transformation, right? Um, and it goes through all these weird things, like his body like starts becoming transparent. He's going through like some really intense audio things, like everything was just really loud and it was like pounding his head and stuff like that. And then in the middle of the story, we go to a flashback, or in the middle of the issue, we go to this flashback of Batman and Robin trying to stop Penguin from committing a crime, and Superman helps him. And it's all sets up to, I think it's like 4 pages, so it's not very long. But at the end of that flashback, Batman tells him, thank you for helping out. I think it might have been like the first time that Superman
Yeah,
has
it
helped
seemed
him.
like it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the way they approached and talked about it seems like it's the first time. And Superman said, "No problem." He's like, "I do this because I know you would have my back, right?" And like Batman shakes his hand and says, "Right." Which part of me is like, is this like a trick? Like, is Batman saying this, as a way of saying like, yes, I'm just going to gain your trust, but I don't trust you because he never trusts anybody, right?
Yeah. And especially with there's pre-crisis, post-crisis,
Yeah,
and the new 50, like whatever continuity this is,
yeah,
sometimes Batman isn't trusting at all.
yeah.
So this one, whatever Wade is showing us, I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. This seems sincere. Like, I just remember when I first saw that, I'm like, is there something like underlying here that's happening? But we find out that the whole reason why they kind of do this flashback is because then, they go back to the present day, what's going on in the issue, that Superman is going through his like fifth or sixth transformation from the red kryptonite cocktail. And he starts having these hallucinations and he thinks that Batman is General Zod. So he starts fighting him, right? Um, but then Batman said, I always have your back, like repeating what he had first told Superman, what Superman first told him in that flashback. And then that's how Superman realizes that it's just a hallucination. It's not real. But then I guess in the midst of all that, Batman calls Niles Calder and Doom Patrol because they were saying that they need to have a specialist to kind of calm Superman down. And if I don't know Niles Calder very well, but from what I do understand, is that Doom Patrol are people that has gone through like these really weird, significant things that are really odd. And he's like kind of like for lack of a better term, Niles Calder is kind of like a Frankenstein scientist where he kind of
Yeah.
mixes a lot of things to kind of, stabilize people and make them well. So like one of the characters is Robot Man, who he takes like the consciousness or brain of a race car driver that died in a car accident and puts it inside of a robot, right? There's another guy named Larry Trainer who I think becomes invisible after a freak accident. All these weird things, right? So in the midst of all this, Batman had called Niles Calder, and the Doom Patrol shows up to help out, and they finally stabilize Superman and takes him over to the mansion where Dr. Niles Calder is at, and that's the end of issue 1, basically.
Yeah.
Issue 2, Kevin, do you want to start explaining what happens in issue 2 after that?
Yeah. So issue 2, it picks up right off where it ends. They're at the Doom Patrol Manor, whatever it would be called.
Mhm.
And they do stabilize them. But it's pretty graphic.
Yeah, like
Which is and
go ahead.
yeah, like like Dan Mora is such a classic looking artist, like his style, but the horror is the body horror is really cool.
Hmm.
Um but so they do neutralize them, and they're all kind of talking afterwards, and they're they're in like the study of this manor, I guess.
Right.
And they kind of come onto the conversation that this whole plot was kind of run by, I say, the devil Nazha.
Yeah,
I don't know.
like that's the thing with comics. Like you don't know how they're really pronounced, really. So I've been saying like Neza, but I don't know
Yeah,
how it's
Neza,
pronounced.
maybe
Yeah,
that. Yeah. Um,
the devil Neza, Naza. Yeah,
yeah. And so you kind of get the whole backstory behind that, and it's very embedded in Chinese mythology.
hmm,
Um, the House of G, or I'm guessing it's G or Jai. Um,
yeah, yeah. It's Ji. It's so again.
yeah,
I'm not sure how to pronounce it either, but I think I've been saying House of G. Um, and this story that they're talking about happened like in 1600 BC.
and it seems like my only basis is like the show Avatar, but
Okay,
each person had a element. All those soldiers, I guess they would be.
right.
So you kind of get the backstory, and so now Supergirl and Robin need to go back and talk to them and figure out how they did it.
Right.
Um, and then am I missing it? Is Billy in this episode, in this issue?
They talk about a so kind of backtrack a little bit. So when they're talking about the Devil Naza, they're talking about the history of like how how he was created. Basically, he had died, and then his father like brought him back to life with some elixir, and then he became immortal, but became evil basically, and like mutated
Yeah.
into this sort of like devil creature. And so to stop him, the House of G, trapped him inside of something, but they don't know what, or didn't even know like they trapped. They just know they stopped him, right? And this was like a
Yeah.
long time
Yes.
ago. And the reason why they're bringing it up is because they have found like his sword, I guess, and that now there's rumblings that he may be back, and they don't know how he escaped or how or anything like that. And the reason for this is because I guess Niles Calder has been monitoring like all the heroes, which Batman gets upset about, which is
Yeah.
interesting because it's like he does kind of the same thing. So I think it's more of like, it's okay if I do it. It's not okay for you to do it.
And he says
But
like, we'll have a word about this later, something
yeah,
like that.
exactly. It's like, we'll talk about this later, which I kind of get because like he's part of the Justice League. So I think they know in a sense that he does this sort of thing. But like for somebody
Yeah.
else that's not part of that group, like I kind of get it, but it's like, it's very much the pot calling the kettle black in that regard. Um, but Niles has said that there's something happening with this boy, and he doesn't say who it is. But also Flash and Wonder Woman, Green Lantern are having some issues, and they don't know what. They just know that they're like frantically fighting somebody, and so the issue ends with Batman and Superman going to save what they find out is Billy Baston, who is Shazam, from this character named Felix Faust, which again, I'm assuming, Kevin, as you've been
I think
saying, that
it's
this is a character from the
yeah.
Silver Age as well, too.
Yeah. I think that's my guess because I'm
Yeah.
not too familiar.
I haven't heard of these characters before, but like once we get into issue 3 and start talking about like who else shows up, these names very much sound like a Silver Age kind of name for
Yeah.
villains, So, but yeah, so that's how issue 2 ends. Is that they go and try to say Batman and Superman goes and tries to help out Billy Baston and Supergirl and Robin. Which, by the way, Superman calls Supergirl, so Supergirl hasn't been on the scene yet until Superman like calls for her to take Robin and go back in time to talk to the House of G to find out how they stop Neville Neza, right? And apparently when Supergirl and Robin like first interact with each other, it was really cool. Like the lettering show them like addressing each other. So Supergirl says Robin, but it's like very cold, and the lettering, the bubble has like those like icicles to make it, look like, this is a very cold
Yeah.
sounding address. So, something happened between the two, and I don't know what happened. And I don't know if anybody really, does, unless you've been, reading everything, but it's clearly there's some tension between the two. Right. So that's how
Yeah.
issue 2 ends. Issue 3, what happens is again, Robin and Supergirl finally goes. They go back to in time to talk to the House of G. When they show up, they have the Devil Naza's sword with them, because that's how Supergirl's able to go back to the exact time to find them.
Yeah.
Because not only does he have the ability to like travel through the time storm or the time, whatever she called it, the time vortex, like you use the sword to kind of be able as like a guiding rod or something like that.
Yeah,
So
that's the way I saw it. Yeah.
yeah. So it's kind of like, it's almost like an artifact for them to know like this is the time period that we're trying to get into, basically. So when they show up, House of G thought that they were with the Devil Neza because of that sword, and so they finally kind of stopped them and explained to them what they're trying to do and that they're from the future. And so House of G explained, they were able to fight him off for like 5 days, and then they were able to put him in a tomb. And then at the end of it, Robin's like, well, there's got to be cuts because that seems really easy. And they said, like, well, there's the issue with sealing the tomb. And that's kind of how that issue leads off with that story is we don't know, how they seal the tomb. Meanwhile, Doom Patrol was sent to find out where the tomb is at because no one knows where the tomb was. And so they meet up with this guy named General Mortis, who's apparently an immortal, but I think he was a villain, but now he has Alzheimer's as well. So he's
Yeah,
not.
it's sad.
Yeah,
It's like really morbid.
it is. Yeah, because that's what they pointed
Yeah.
out. They're like, oh my gosh, this man is like going to live forever, and he has Alzheimer's, so he's going to live forever with that. And it's we all know it's a very painful, debilitating disease. So like it's just a even as a villain, it's just like it's very tragic to see anyone go through.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So they find out from him that the location of the tomb, of all places, is off of Corto Maltese, which I feel like Corto Maltese is like the go-to place for anything, sinister to happen for a story, right?
Yeah, yep.
Yeah. And then as that's going on, Superman and Batman fly off to Central City to save the Flash from Mirror Master, which again sounds like
Hmm.
a Silver Age villain, and Wonder Woman from Dr. Alchemy. In the process, we see Green Lantern shows up, but he is clearly possessed and he traps Superman and Batman in a Green Lantern cell. And it ends the issue with Batman asking Alfred, check and see where the other Justice League members are at. And Alfred says that everything looks fine, but we see that in the Batcave, the Devil Neza is like
Right
possessing him.
behind
Like,
him.
yeah, he's behind him. It looks like he might be
Yeah,
possessing him or something like that. Yeah. So that's kind of how the issue ends, right?
yeah.
You want to go to issue 4? Because I know issue 4 is really exciting for me. It's probably my favorite issue from the series. But do you want to explain what happens in issue 4?
Yeah. So in issue 4, it starts off Robin and Supergirl are still back in time,
Mm-hmm.
but now House of G told them how to uh, seal it, which we'll find out um, as they're coming back. And it's kind of funny seeing Supergirl just hold Robin.
Yes.
Just kind of like Superman does the same thing to Batman.
I know, it's so
As
funny.
they're
It's like this display of power that they show off. Like they could hold him because they're like super beings. Like they could probably hold him in any like certain way, but
yeah,
it's almost like displaying their power of like just to remind you, like I'm holding you this way to embarrass you in a sense because I'm more powerful than you are. Like it's always funny. They always fly them the same way. It's like no matter what story or issue you're reading from any series, they always hold them in that same way, and I find it hysterical. It's just like you don't see him like being held or carried or anything else in a different way. It's always like that, and it's yeah, I agree with you. It's hysterical to see that.
yeah. And it might be in the newest issue, but Robin is flying on Superman's bat. He might be Indian, like sitting cross-legged, like on a device, maybe not a phone.
Right.
Um, but so we get that great visual,
Mm-hmm.
but there's some type of storm, like a time storm, and Robin slips,
Mm-hmm.
and what we see is he's lost in time. Um, and so Supergirl comes back. Um, and we'll see here a little later. Meanwhile, Batman and Superman are fighting the Green Lantern, the Devil Neza, um, and they kind of figure out that because the ring is built on willpower,
Mm-hmm.
they 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 both kind of do it like the Care Bear thing where they will it, and the ring comes to them, and they fuse into. How would you describe it?
It's like a um almost like Super Green Man, right? Like it's a hybrid, which is really cool. It's a hybrid of Superman, Batman, and Green Lantern, all as like a singular entity, both in terms of not so much mind, because you see like both of the consciousness kind of talking back and forth between the two,
Yeah,
but it's one person, so they're infused with each other and with the Green Lantern. But it's funny because like you said, Batman said, their willpowers alone can't override him, but it's like, but maybe both of ours combined can override it. And that's exactly what happens. It's like the Captain Planet effect, like all your powers
yeah.
combined, and so that's what's happened is, they become like the singular entity, and so they go ahead and start fighting Devil Nezza, and then apparently has his own Justice League of people that
Yeah,
he
like that
possessed.
Justice League, um, which they all look great.
Mm-hmm.
Just like that fight scene, I immediately thought of the fusions from Dragon Ball Z. I don't know
Oh
if you
yeah.
watched that,
I've
but
I've not I've seen a few episodes, but like a long time ago, so
yeah,
probably not.
that's
Yeah.
it. It's like the two people fuse, and then they can kind of just clear up and take everyone out.
Hmm.
But it was great writing, but the execution of Super Batman taking everyone out while there's a countdown
Yeah.
when the power is running out, and they shoot him up, Neza, into the sky. They know where they have to go,
Hmm.
and as the power is running out, um, they're getting him there. And if I remember correctly, Supergirl comes at that very moment and kind of finishes the job to get
Right.
him to Corto Maltese.
Right. Yeah, because the
Yeah,
the Green Lantern ring, if you're not familiar, it's like it's charged, so it has like a charge. So it only lasts for so long, and then once it's depleted, you have to put the ring inside an actual lantern to recharge. And so, as all this is happening, you see that countdown that you were talking about, and they're trying to get him to Corto Maltese, and the ring pretty much gets depleted, and they separate out into Superman, Batman as their own entity. And so, Neza has that upper hand, and then that's when Supergirl shows up and knocks him into Corto Maltese. And then the issue ends with Supergirl telling them, and Doom Patrol shows up as well too, how to seal the tomb, which is somebody has to seal it from the inside. And that's like the whole, twist of events that happens, right? So
great ending.
say what?
It was like just the pacing, that huge fight, and then the realization someone has to be in the tomb.
Yeah, like
It's
that
just
last
great.
that final page, splash page is like each of the characters like faces in shock when Supergirl explains like what has to happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, so issue 5, which is the final issue of the trade paperback that we're covering, the volume 1, is pretty much the final battle issue. And as they're fighting Neza has this ability to possess people. So he possesses Superman and Rita Fair of Doom Patrol, who's like a Elastigirl, I guess, or she has elasticity, so she can kind of make herself big. She can stretch herself out a little bit, things like that. And then in the midst of all those things, Robot Man hits Neza and hits him like really hard, and everyone's really
Yeah.
surprised how he knocks him out. And then Supergirl remembers that when they were talking to House of G, that they said Neza, is familiar with every form of like science and element, but she realizes that's from his era back in 1600 BC. He's not familiar with any of this technology in current day. So that kind of gives him the upper hand. And Superman and Rita is free from his mind control. And then Superman like flies out to the Fortress of Solitude for like a quick 30 seconds and comes back with a Phantom Zone gun, which again, maybe that's from Silver Age, but I remember thinking like a gun that creates Phantom Zone. Like maybe that's how it is. I've never seen in the comics how Superman sends them into the Phantom Zone, but he has a gun that just does that, right?
Yeah. And it looks like a toy.
It looks like a toy. Yeah, exactly. So I'm wondering if like they're going to market it later on, be like, oh, I get the Phantom Zone toy or
Yeah.
gun, Send your friends to the the mirror dimension. But so Superman sends Neza there, but Neza, apparently adapts really quickly and comes back through the dimension. And so in the last ditch effort, Superman grabs Neza and he grabs the enchanted talisman that the House of G gave Supergirl in order to seal the tomb. And he flies both of them into the tomb, closes the tomb, and seals the tomb from inside. So it seems like Neza and Superman are both in inside the tomb for all eternity. But as that's happening and people are, kind of in this grim state of realization, Batman also realizes that the Phantom Zone gun is missing and he's asking where it's at. And then they're looking around and they see like this little sliver of crack in just like out in the open in space. And Batman realizes that's the Phantom Zone. So they all go to that barrier and like pulling it apart, pulling it open, and Superman reaches his arms out. So they're all like pulling him out from the from that. And basically Superman is in the tomb, but they're pulling him out from the tomb through the Phantom Zone dimension, and then they seal it up before Neza gets out. And so it kind of ends with Neza's fate being sealed, pun intended there. And the issue ends with Supergirl explaining what happened to Robin and that she lost him in the time stream during the time storm accident. And then it's apparent that in the next issue, Batman's going to work on trying to retrieve Robin from the time stream. And so that's how volume 1 ends. And that is the summary and synopsis. Kevin, is there anything that we missed that we want to put in there for any of the listeners before we start going into our review of it?
I think we hit it all. A lot of nice, which we'll probably talk about, a lot of nice Batman, Superman emotional moments, I guess. Like Batman's human, which is nice. Yeah.
He's definitely not like a grittier grimmer character in this, which I really enjoy. Yeah, that's like you said. We'll go into this a little bit later, but
Yeah.
it's definitely a Mark Waid kind of character where he likes to have things a little bit lighter, and it's nice to have that sort of balance in that, and you
Yeah.
definitely see that in the writing here and the art. So yeah, I agree. It's really good. So, um, so before we get into our review, let's share what some of the listeners thought about the series. I tweeted out and posted in Discord and posted in our Slack channel for Comic Watch what people thought about Batman Superman World's Finest Volume 1 here. And from Comic Watch, our reviewer Anthony Bergamini said there's something special about seeing the friendship between Batman and Superman. Maybe it's the warring personalities or the drastically different upbringings, but it just works. Either way, Mark Waid brings the best out of that with this series. And then from hold on a second, I just messed up here. Okay, and then from our Illuminati Discord channel, Joe Loves Comics says, great fun series. Love the classic versions of the characters, how they're written by Waid, the classic aesthetic by Mora, and Bonvillain, so vibrant and just delightful. And then also from the Illuminati Discord channel, Kim from ODPH Podcast said, one of the comics' best writers teams up with the hottest artists in the game to re-energize one of the most iconic duos in comics history. Big wins all around. And excuse me. Again, if you want to join the Discord, the Illuminati Discord that we have, there's a lot of great people in it. I have a link to that in the show notes if you want to join that. So it's open to anybody. And then on Twitter, we have So Wizard Podcast said the world's finest chef's kiss emoji, best book on the stands. And Bumpkins TV on Twitter said my favorite book of 2022 and my favorite book on the stand. So a lot of people seems like really enjoy this. I don't think I've heard a lot of negative things or any negative things about this story so far. And so it seems like everybody I talked to about this, everybody absolutely loves the story. And it's definitely been one of the best sellers from DC Comics so far this year. So thank you everybody who shared their thoughts. Kevin, before we start going into like our favorite moments and the I wish moments, what's your overall thoughts about the series and anything that you want to share about that?
Like a elevator pitch if I was selling it to someone.
Yeah.
It's a Saturday morning cartoon. Like you don't need to know a lot, I guess, but you get great Batman moments, great Superman moments. The art is stunning. The writing is smart, and it's I'm not a big fan of writing for the trade, but five issues is a pretty good, well-paced little first volume.
Right. Yeah, especially this one. I mean, this one's definitely a good collection because it's all centered on Devil Neza. And I don't know what's happened after issue 5, but my guess is, that villain is pretty much contained. So they're moving on to the next series. But yeah, I thought the writing was really well done. There are some moments where it's a little bit confusing about where some of these elements are coming from. So like, for example, when Supergirl and Robin have that whole, discussion when they first, acknowledge each other in the series, I'm not sure where that's coming from, but at the same time, it's written in a way that it doesn't really leaves the readers, confused or think that they're missing out on a lot, because he does a pretty good job of not letting you dwell on that and realizing and inviting you into that relationship and that story of seeing like what's happening now. Like, yeah, there's obviously some sort of history that's happened, but you don't need to know what that history was in order to enjoy the story that's happening here. And I think that's kind of a hard balance to hit with comics, especially if there's tie-ins, which I don't think there's any tie-ins with this story. But with tie-ins, you sometimes as a reader feel like you have to read all these other stories to know what's going on in this one. And I don't think you have to in this one. Like, yes, there's something, historical that may have happened between the two, but it doesn't really leaves you really confused as you're going through the story either.
Yeah.
One thing
I think that interaction, I think it's like issue 11. You see the date that they're talking about.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that until I reread it.
Right.
Saying something about I didn't think there'd be a monkey there, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
All that you can go read it. but I think characters can infer enough history between the two that even if there wasn't that issue,
Hmm.
Wade did a pretty good job just kind of placing that there.
Right.
And you either know, even if there's nothing to know, you kind
Yeah.
of get it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that was actually one of my favorite one of my favorite moments from the series is that whole interaction that they had. Because even though you don't know the history of like what they're talking about, there's this whole. Well, I'll go into that a little bit later. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, like overall, like I thought the art was fantastic. I absolutely love not just the artwork and the coloring, but the compositions that they have in there, and just how they told the story from a visual medium. And so I think I can see why this is a very popular series for a lot of people because it's a lighter story than what we usually get from DC Comics because everyone knows that DC Comics is like always, the darker series. And this one's definitely a lighter one that is very enjoyable. I know you compare it to like Saturday morning cartoons. I wouldn't
Yeah.
compare it to that necessarily, but it's definitely lighter in a sense of like maybe it's more of a like a TGIF type of thing where there's still some of that serious drama that happens, but there's also enough comedy and warm-hearted moments that you get as well too. So I think
Yeah.
that's why
Yeah.
it's really popular with a lot of people is because it's a little bit different than what we usually get from DC Comics. I gotta say, in terms of art, now they explain that this is kind of a play with Silver Age characters, stuff like that. I've never really been a fan of Supergirl having a skirt. I know that's how she was drawn when she was first introduced, and that we can go into that whole, that's kind of displaying, the what's the word I'm looking for? The sexist nature that's happened, in comics like way back in the 30s and 40s and everything like that. But nowadays, like I get why people still do the skirt because it's kind of like that classic nostalgia. And as you said, this is kind of playing a little bit on the Silver Age as well. But I've always been, in this day and age, I think Supergirl just needs to not have a skirt and just have, pants or
A
something
suit.
different. Yeah, a
Yeah.
suit, something, different than the skirt because I don't think there's any reason for her to have a skirt anymore. So
No, that's
yeah,
funny too because uh Dick Grayson has pants.
yeah,
They mention it too. I think in the flashback he has his shorts.
yeah.
Um, but that's he has pants, but she doesn't. I don't know
Hmm.
if you've read the Supergirl series by Tom King.
Oh, Woman of Tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's on my read list actually. So not yet, no, but I'm
Okay.
planning to.
Really,
Yeah,
really good.
that's what I've
Really
heard.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, the fact that
Uh,
they're going to be making a movie based on that story tells you that's got to be good.
yeah. The first printing was like a lot of paper imperfections.
Uh huh.
I got it the day it came out, like $5 cheaper
Oh no, kidding.
because DC had no uh, like they just did not care, and they
Right.
just printed as cheaply as possible. A couple months later,
Hmm.
James Gunn says he's going to make a movie, and they immediately went for reprints.
Yeah.
So it's very, very good. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So with uh with this volume, Kevin, what was one of your key or favorite movie? I'm sorry. What was one of your key or favorite moments from this series that you want to share?
My favorite. There's so many good moments between Batman and Superman. I think the one I loved the most was when they pull Superman out of the Phantom Zone
Hmm.
and Batman says something like, um, Superman says, like, I knew you'd save me or something.
Yeah.
And Batman goes, that's quite the hunch. And then Superman says, like, expecting Batman to notice something. It's not a hunch, that's a plan. Something
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
And that is like world's finest. Like that is it. Batman and Superman acting the way I think they should act. I think a
Hmm.
lot of people will agree. Looking
Right.
the way they should, acting the way they should. Um, it was just one of those those moments that you don't see a lot anymore, or you don't
Right.
get a lot anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's well, and I like that um that whole scene as well too, because throughout the whole series, you see that one of the things that I think people get hung up on with Superman is that they always think that he's all powerful and almost everything. And this is kind of a reminder of that even Superman has limits, right? So they really focus on the fact that Superman is vulnerable to magic. They point out how Batman and Robin are great detectives to the point that Superman and Supergirl both need them in order to help them figure out what's going on. Because that's when Superman called Supergirl to help find out from the House of G, like how they trapped the Devil Neza. Supergirl said, like, I can do this on my own, but Superman said, well, you definitely need a detective's mindset
Yeah.
on this, and so that's why Robin's going with you. So it's a nice reminder of how they have their own limitations, and that we shouldn't always jump to they're unstoppable in all things, because they're not. They have limits in other things. But it's really cool to see, just like what you said here, that Superman is picking up on, like, he still can plan things and kind of pick things up from Batman in terms of planning ahead, right? And so it's really cool to see that Batman has that advantage all the way through the end, and then Superman takes a page from his playbook and just plans on, he knows this is what Batman's going to do, this is what he's going to figure out, and that he was relying on him, and that he just takes a page out of his own playbook to be able to, save the world again, and be able to do that. So it's a really cool way to kind of juxtapose and show how Batman's the world's greatest detective, and that they all know it, but then Superman relies on that detective skills without even telling Batman to be able to finish off the story. So yeah, I like that kind of interchange that they have at the end there, and that kind of just shows that relationship between the two, and how they acknowledge, like, each other's strengths, and how they rely on each other in certain moments too.
Yeah.
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 For me, I was talking about this earlier, but the one of my favorite moments is the exchange between Supergirl and Robin, as Supergirl is flying Robin to the time stream, and again holding him very awkwardly,
Yeah.
right, as like a
Like a
power play
kitten
move.
by the scruff.
Yeah, and Robin's just like, arms crossed, as he's just kind of being held across the sky and everything, and like clearly not happy with this. But as we mentioned, they had like this cold um exchange at earlier in the story, and they just said, like, Supergirl says, like, we're on a mission, and Robin's like, I know, and she says, so any conversation needs to be professional. So again, alluding to something happened with them between, like, in the past, and then they drew this kind of like awkward pause between the two, that no one's saying anything. Then all of a sudden they just go into fighting about like whatever issues they have between each other, and it just kind of goes back and forth about, like, it's either a single event or like multiple events that's happened that clearly they were upset with each other, and it's very, very funny. Like, I remember laughing at that whole page. It's just how I can hear that happening in my head, or even watching it on screen, I can see that taking
Yeah.
place. And it was just, again, it's one thing that I think Mark Waid really excels at, in being able to tell and take a gritty story, or gritty characters like Batman, Superman, like, Daredevil. He's done the same thing as well too, and add some lightheartedness comedy into it without, making it a goofy kind of story. And I think this is like a great moment of showing, how they had that comedic moment. It's funny as that page, and then they just kind of moved on from that. And I absolutely love, this is like a really great highlight of how Mark Waid can really capture some of those, comedic moments, to be able to tell a fun story, but not detract from the seriousness of the situation either. So I absolutely love that. That was one of my favorite moments in this story. Um, Looking at this volume, was there anything in there that you're just like, I wish this would have been different, or I wish they would have done that?
I've been thinking about this, and now, because I've read 15 or whatever, every issue so far. You mentioned earlier how you're not a fan of tie-ins,
It's not that I'm not a fan of
or
tie-ins. It's more of, I think sometimes tie-ins get a little too much, that it gets overwhelming if there are things in the story that it's clearly you need to know something from this story, and that you can go down through this whole rabbit hole. And I think that's what a lot of people's problems with comics nowadays is that we tell them, just jump into a story and start with something that interests you if you've never done, if you've never read one of those stories. But because some of these series are always reliant on, like X-Men, for example, it's really bad at, hey, here's the X-Men story, but there's like 20 different series that all kind of, rely on each other for you to know like what's going on. I think that gets overwhelming and very costly for people to just try to enjoy a story. That's why a lot of people probably wait for the trade paperback or just can't really get into it if they feel like they're missing out on a lot when the story is relying on all these tie-ins. So I'm not against tie-ins. What I am against is having so many tie-ins that gets overwhelming in terms of how many issues and how many series you need to keep up with just to know what's going on in the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With this, the last page, you see Damien finding the tomb. I don't know if you caught that.
I did, yeah.
This whole volume is setting up Batman versus Robin, which set up Lazarus Planet.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, I mean, this is more big picture and behind the scenes, but it seems like that kind of tie-in aspect of it was like an editor mandate. They wanted to get Lazarus Planet going.
Right.
And it's on the third arc of World's Finest now, and it now feels like Waid has hit his stride and he's doing what he wants to do with the series.
Right.
That's my thing. Like looking back, I think Waid would have had if he had a little more freedom, it would have like landed a little better. I mean, it's fantastic.
Right.
But there's always that little bit of the like DC overall picture that kind of influences things that can be good. Sometimes it's a little too much, I guess.
Right. Yeah. I think for me, the part that I wish would have been a little bit better is I think there are some parts that didn't have a great connection or flow or explanation into why some of these things happen, right? So for example, how they went from Niles Calder fixing Superman to all of a sudden talking about, the Devil Neza. I'm not sure why they stuck around to talk about these things. It just kind of went from one page to the other as though 20 hours later, now they're just sitting around having tea and they're talking about, this sort of thing. And it's not clear to me why they got to that point. In issue number 1, we saw a silhouette of Neza and in the background, like he's the person kind of behind why Metallo, injected the red kryptonite into Superman. And there was someone else there, but I have no idea who the second person is. And maybe they reveal that in a later arc or story, and maybe we just haven't got to that. But for me in volume 1, it's not clear who that second person is. They didn't explain how the House of G, got the sword from the Devil Neza. Just little things like that, like Alfred and Neza, when we're talking about how he was standing behind Alfred and might be mind controlling whatever, nothing really happened after that. Did he just leave Alfred be and just left him alone? I think the Devil Neza would have been, let's kill this guy because he's not a very friendly person, So there's just little things that at the same time, even though they do not really detract from the story and that it still works well and that I enjoyed the story very much and that these are just little things that really don't bring the score down for me too much. There's just things I'm I just wish they would have explained these things, just either take maybe not a full, page or anything like that, but maybe a panel or two, just kind of say, how this connection happened or something like that. So it's just very little things. It's minute. It doesn't detract from the greater story at all because I love the story. I think it was a really good story, but it's just little things like that where I catch myself saying wait, what happened here? Why, for that example of when they dove into the story of Devil Neza, it's did I miss something? Why is just sitting around talking about this now? So that's been my biggest hang up, but yeah.
It's funny too, because now that I've read a lot of this, I've read Lazarus Planet, I read Batman versus Robin. I think all that gets explored. The flashback might be explored in Monkey Prince,
Okay.
which is a big part of Lazarus Planet.
Yeah.
The Alfred thing gets revisited in Batman versus Robin,
Okay.
which is kind of both of our things. Like, I don't want to have to read to get the full, even if just a little context in a panel. I
Right.
don't want to have to go read 3 other series.
Right. Yeah. I know. Like I said, like there's a good balance. Like I think if you have like maybe a few series that's interchanged with each other, like you could do that. But like I said, with X-Men, with having so many tie-in series, I think that's just overwhelmingly too much for people to
Yeah,
really like get into. I know, like as an X-Men fan, I'm always going to read, but I'm not going to read all of them. Probably just going to select the ones that seems interesting to me. But even then, there are times I'm like, I don't know what's going on in this part of the story that they're referring to. So I think having some tie-ins, like just like 3 or 4 at most, works. But yeah, when you don't have those things in there, again, it wasn't detrimental that they didn't explain what happened to Alfred, right? It was just more of like, you just want to know what happened to Alfred. Like, is he still alive? There's a very sinister and ominous way to end that issue that you think something's going to happen to him, and then it just never gets addressed. Um,
yeah,
so it's just one of those things that's just like kind of curious, like, well, so what did happen to him? But it didn't detract from the story. It wasn't a hole in the story by any means whatsoever. So it still worked.
yeah,
It's just more of like
yeah,
I wanted to know.
yeah,
so
yeah, absolutely.
so what's your final favorite moment from the series here?
My favorite moment, I th- I think, was it issue 4 when they fuse. That that was Mark Waid and Mora and uh, Bonvillain taking the toy box and just dumping it out,
Yeah. The
and
Superman,
literally
Batman, Green Lantern hybrid suit.
and
Yeah.
the Justice League is there.
Yeah.
Um, that was just, I think as a kid I would have loved that.
Hmm.
Um, but reading it now was just so fun. And I think when I'm reading Batman,
Yeah.
I I'm not expecting to have fun. So it was a nice reminder. Just that was a really fun issue.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a really fun issue for me as well too. I absolutely love the the concept of having Superman and Batman, combining into a single person with the Green Lantern ring. The suit design was absolutely my favorite. I remember seeing images posted on social media and I remember thinking, what is this? This looks really cool. I thought it was like a brand new character that someone created, not realizing like this is the story that it's from and what it is. So when I first saw that
Yeah,
page, I was like, oh, this was where it's from. And I absolutely love the design of it. I hope we see more of that sort of either entity again in the future or at least more fun combos like that. Because I'll tell you what, the way that Moore designed it is so great because he combined Superman and Batman so seamlessly into this sort of thing. Like even the symbol that shows up, right? It's like a
oh, Symbol's
Batman
great.
Superman combo that I want that symbol on a shirt so I can start wearing that around. I absolutely
Yeah,
love that symbol. I think it was so cool. But yeah, that was my favorite moment as well too. Is just seeing that, not just the suit. I absolutely love that suit, but the fun that they had with the power. So when when Batman's telling Superman, use your imagination, he took the Green Lantern power of creating batarangs out from thin air and started throwing it, and all the things that they came up with was really cool. So yeah, I agree. That whole issue is just fantastic and a lot of fun with the action. But I absolutely love the hybrid suit that they came up with. I think it was a lot of fun. It's a very fun, creative way to think of like a what if situation and kind of make it a reality. And it lasted for not even an entire issue. It lasted for like half an issue, but it was just so much fun to read and see how creative and how ingenuous, or not ingenuous, but how ingenious they got with it. And I absolutely love that
yeah,
issue for that reason. I agree.
yeah. And it didn't completely change the outcome.
Right.
It wasn't overused.
Right.
Um, you got some amazing visuals,
Hmm.
and the way it ended too, with Supergirl coming to kind of finish the job as they disconnect. it
Yes.
was perfect. Yeah.
Yes. Now, again, what's funny is the Justice League was under the Devil and Neza's mind control at that point, right? Of those
Yeah.
characters. So once he got knocked out, you would think that the rest of the Justice League would have like snapped out and be like, "Oh, what's going on?" And then somehow reach out to Superman, Batman, and like join them and trying to
Yeah.
stop. But again, that's one of those things where I think this is also something that as comic readers have to realize with telling these stories is that those are details that you just sometimes have to let go. Like, don't say, I wish they would have inserted this, or this, like, and don't get hung up with that sort of thing. Cause I think it's hard for us to do that, especially in this day and age where we're always like over rationalizing, like, why did this happen? Why did
Yeah.
this happen? And they never explained that. Well, just because it didn't explain it doesn't mean that, there's a issue with it. That's just, they didn't tell the story that way. So,
Yeah. They had to go back to their cities to
yeah.
take on a
Well, and
like
good. Yeah.
well, that was it. Yeah.
Yeah. um, but yeah, so and that's the thing is like issue 5 happens pretty quickly that they probably didn't have time to figure out like, hey, what's going on and reach out to them before all this happened either. It's issue
Yeah.
5, like it was probably, even though it was an entire issue, probably like it was probably like a 5-minute thing that happened at that point.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is pretty much our review of Batman Superman World's Finest. So let's go into the next segment of the show, which is the comics that we're reading for this week of April 24th of Monday. And I know this episode comes out on Tuesday, but we usually kind of release this part of the segment as a separate video piece on YouTube on a Monday. And so this week, what we're going to talk about are the comics that we're reading currently, but also what's in our poll list if we have anything on our poll list. So before Kevin and I share what we're reading, what's in our poll list, I'm going to share what people have shared with us, what they're reading. So from Comic Watch, B. Rat shared that he is reading the Silver Age X-Men / Avengers crossover. It's definitely a product of its time. Best chapters are obviously the Roy Thomas penned Avengers, but the X-Men issues are rather enjoyable. They're dealing with the death of Professor X, and they're entering into an era where they don't know exactly what this team wants to be. Anthony Bergamini from Comic Watch also said that he is reading Firestorm from Jerry Conway and Eduardo Pensica, which I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. Anthony said that it's a great modern update of the character that returns the character to a status quo that's closer to his pre-New 52 roots. From the Discord server, Kim from the ODPH podcast said that he's reading Local Man by Image Comics, an interesting story mixing in elements of early Image for a modern retro vibe. And then from Twitter, we have @Fet Pizarro said that he just got done reading The Mighty Barbarians #1, which I think is from the Ablaze Comics Publishing. It was fun as heck, and he really liked it. Kevin, of all those comics that they shared, was there any that you have read or liked or anything like that?
I'm trying to I think what did Anthony say?
Anthony says he's reading Firestorm from Jerry Conway and Eduardo Pensica, which I know Jerry Conway has written Firestorm. I don't know about Eduardo. I've been trying to figure out which one he worked on, but I can't find that one for some reason. But it's the one from Jerry Conway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not really I love hearing what people are reading.
Yeah.
But I haven't read any of that, I don't think.
I honestly I haven't either, but just like what you said, I like doing this segment, asking people what they're reading because hearing what they have to share, what their thoughts are about what they're reading, makes me want to go read those things as well too. One of the ones that I know I definitely want to read is this Local Man by Image Comics that Ken from ODPH said. It sounds really interesting, and I looked up the cover art, and the cover art looks really cool too. So,
Oh, is that one very 90s Image Comics?
maybe I
Kinda.
think it's more recent. I think it might be an ongoing one, but I don't know 100% for sure. I just looked it up real quick, just out of curiosity. So I don't know when it came out, but it looked a little bit recent. It didn't seem like it was a 90s
Okay.
comic, but again, I didn't really, study it in depth to see where it came
Yeah.
out. So, so thank you everybody for sharing what you're reading. Kevin, what are you currently reading, and what do you have on your poll list this week?
Non-comics wise, I'm reading through Lord of the Rings for the first time.
Oh,
So it's
nice.
taking a lot of my
I bet.
time. I also just started Once in Future.
Okay,
written by
yeah.
Kieran Gillen, Dan Mora, Tamra Bonvillain. Um, Fantastic series. I'm only a couple issues in, but the art is fantastic.
Hmm.
This week, I think the Green Arrow #1 is coming out by
Yes.
Josh Williamson,
Yes.
and then the Riddler Year One to 4 is coming out. I don't know if you've read that, but that's a really good series.
I that's on my poll list. So that's on my poll for this week. And I agree. It's fantastic. It's written by Paul Dano, who plays the Riddler
Yeah,
in the Batman movie. And it's written really well. And the artwork captures the story so well. What I love about the artwork in that one is that it really captures it reflects the mental state of Riddler as he's going through some of these moments and these issues. And I absolutely love it. I think it's a really different way of
yeah,
telling the story of the Riddler. It's definitely, again, because it's Paul Dano writing it, it definitely is in continuity with the movie, but it's really, really fascinating. And I love everything about that series. It's definitely one of the ones I'm really glad I picked up and I kept on my pull list because it's such a fantastic story from a storytelling perspective, from the writing, from the art, everything about it. I really like. It's definitely more on the darker, depressing side that we talk about DC
yeah,
is known for, but it's really,
yeah.
really good in how they do that and telling that story of it. So it's yeah, I agree. It's really good. So yeah, that's on my pull list as well.
Cool, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Um, I think that's it. I haven't looked at what's coming out for Marvel, but I'm definitely leaning towards DC a lot these days.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely get a lot from Marvel and DC, but I'm getting a lot from other ones as well too, especially when I'm hearing recommendations from people. Like this one came out last week, but no one from Image Comics and Black Market Narrative, written by Kyle Higgins. Like that's definitely one I absolutely love, and that was from a recommendation from a friend of mine. But this week on my poll list, I'm getting Daredevil #10, the Riddler Year One. We already talked about Sins of Sinister Dominion. I think is supposed to be wrapping up like the current Sins of Sinister storyline. So I think this is the last one. Tales from Nottingham #3, which if you don't know about that one, that is kind of like a spinoff series from Nottingham of Mad Cave Studios. That's written by David Hazan. That's a kind of like a retelling of the Robin Hood story. So I'm getting that issue this week, and then I have been loving all the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles stuff. So I'm getting issue number 139 this week. And then the last Ronin the Lost Years is coming out this week as well, too. So I'm getting that issue. In terms of things I'm going to start reading this week, if you've been listening to like the last 5 episodes, you'll hear me say that I'm going to start X-Men Red. I have not started it yet, but I'm really, really hoping I will to this week because I'm caught up on all my pull lists. I've been traveling around. I've gotten sick, and so I've been behind on a lot of things. So I haven't been able to get to X-Men Red, but I definitely have it on my to read this week. So I'm planning on starting it this week. So I promise everybody I'm reading it this week. And I'm also going to read like what we talked about, Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, which I was really lucky that I picked that up because, like you said, it sold out everywhere in terms of printings and everything. And I thought all my local comic shops had them sold out, but I was able to find one at one of the shops I went to. So I snagged it right away and I said, I'm going to pick it up and read it. So I'm going to read that. Hopefully started this week as well too. So thank you everybody for sharing what they're reading. And thank you, Kevin, for sharing what you're reading, what's on your pull list this week. And thank you for coming on the show to talk about Batman, Superman, World's Finest. This is a great story. I'm not probably going to start picking up single issues just because I haven't been following along. So I'm probably going to wait until the trade paperbacks come out. But I'm hoping that maybe at some point I could try to get caught up that I can start picking up the single issues and all that. But this was a fantastic series. I absolutely love this one. So thank you for suggesting this. Before I let you go, where can everybody find you and your work online?
You can find me on Twitter at Bronco Nova. Like that's the handle.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's pretty much what's public. My Instagram is at Kevin Rossi. You can request it, but it's just nice to have things private. But
Yeah,
I accept everyone. But Twitter's where I'm most active. Yeah.
awesome. And then I'll make sure to get a link of all your reviews for Comic Watch as well too, and I'll put that in the show notes as well.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah. I know we don't usually think about that, but we actually have a page where it lists all of our reviews that people can go to and look at.
Oh, that's been like 5 years, 4 years.
Yeah,
Didn't know that.
I just stumbled onto I forget how I figured it out, but I think I clicked on my name one day and it took me to that. I was like, oh, this is so nice to have like all the
Oh,
reviews. Yeah.
that
In one
makes sense.
spot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you want to read Kevin's reviews, I'll put that in the show notes as well too. So well,
I've
thanks.
done
Good.
all 14 issues of World's Finest, so you can keep on reading those.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so that'll be really good. If you want to see Kevin's takes on each of the issues, definitely check that out. So, Kevin, thanks again for joining us, and you are welcome back on the show anytime. But yeah, thank you again for coming on the show and talking about Batman, Superman, World's Finest.
Thanks for having me.
And that wraps up another episode of The Caption Life. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. You can follow us on social media at Caption Life. For more information about us and all of our previous episodes, visit thecaptionlife.com.